Okay, guys, I'm going to dive into this a little bit. I'm going to be doing some spoiler discussion around The Last of Us Part 2, and what I wanted to do was frame this up a little bit differently. I didn't want to go beat by beat and talk about every single plot point and every story device that Naughty Dog employed in making The Last of Us Part 2. I'm going to give you guys some reasons why I believe this game is incredibly special, worthy of its 10 out of 10 score, and has been so powerful and so effective for me as a player and many other reviewers out there, but also lots and lots of players now that it's out in the wild. But I also understand its divisiveness. I understand people had an aversion to some real key story moments. And so I'm going to be spoiling stuff in this discussion, but I'm trying to frame things up a little bit more concretely, again, because I'm doing this off the top of my head, but I gave myself some points. So 10 pointers on why this game is so special and deserves a 10 out of 10 score. But 3 key things happen in this game that I think create some tension and you have to contend with as a player and potentially as a massive fan of The Last of Us Part 1. Now, I'm getting into spoilers. One of the things that I definitely have to highlight in this discussion is the fact that ever since Season 7 of The Walking Dead, where Glenn got his head bashed in by Negan, and we saw that on that show, which was a pop culture juggernaut, you know, the Walking Dead series. And we saw one of the characters that pretty much every fan was a really big fan of get decimated in such a horrific way. It also became a real divisive moment in that series. But what that moment did is it escalated the gruesome violence that we would see around fiction like this. Likewise, series like HBO's Game of Thrones and Westworld, we have seen some horrific stuff. And a lot of that has transpired since the launch, clearly, of the first Last of Us game. And I think as storytellers, Naughty Dog was trying to meet and exceed a lot of the challenging material that entertainment consumers were grappling with adult-oriented fiction out there. So consequently, the violence is one of the massive sticking points of The Last of Us Part 2. It's very gritty, it's very realistically illustrated for us, it's very hard to stomach, as I expressed in my spoiler-free discussion, and it's incredibly effectual and powerful and visceral, and it doesn't make you feel good. And one of the key things, and we're diving right into spoilers now, so play this game before we get into this, okay? Joel is killed in a gruesome way, and certainly it evoked imagery of Glenn getting killed in a gruesome way in The Walking Dead. But obviously Joel is a central hero and a figure that we have great empathy for as fans of The Last of Us. It was really, really hard to watch because there's nothing you can do as a player. You have no agency there. You watch Joel just get destroyed, yes, with a golf club, by Abby.
You stupid old man. You don't get to rush this.
You, as Ellie, you're just sitting there constrained, watching your father figure die in front of you. And that is hard. That moment is captured with serious blunt force trauma. There's no romanticizing it. It's gruesome and it's ugly and it's awful. And you'll see that that kind of strain permeates throughout my discussion about why this game is so powerful. But that moment is heavy and awful, and I think it should be. And at first, I really hated it. At first, I was like, what? Why would that happen? Okay? And we'll get into this a little bit in the context of the story and why one of my points is Joel is definitely well represented in this game. But that's one of the key sticking points that people have to deal with. Another one is that Ellie has a same-sex relationship and a real love with Dina. throughout this game, which I think a lot of people just can't understand or grapple with or don't like or whatever. But it is 2020, and people should check their watches. So I'm not going to even dive into that. The other one is that this game allows us to play another character that's introduced in this game through great stretches of the game. Her name is Abby, and we get a little taste of who this character is early on in the game to sort of build up a little bit of our sympathetic leanings towards this character. And then, of course, she becomes Joel's killer. And we understand why she is doing it, and we understand more and more as the story progresses. But the big kind of shocker of this game is that a big chunk of the game is devoted to her story and her eventual progress towards this inevitable showdown with Ellie a couple of times. And those play out magnificently and powerfully, but there's a lot of meandering and a lot of getting to those points where we as players have to kind of be invested and go along for this and get over all of our concern and care for Ellie, but also our memories of what has just transpired with Joel. And that's a tall order, and Naughty Dog knew that. And like I said in my spoiler-free discussion, I was out, when Joel was killed, and I have to give a crap about Abby. That was almost too much to ask of me as a fan of the first Last of Us and of these two characters specifically. Plus, I was meeting all of these ancillary characters. But having to kind of, grapple with any sense of care for Abby, who I just wanted I wanted her pulverized. I wanted Ellie to just take her right out, was almost more than I could handle from this game. And it took many, many hours of playing as Abby before I kind of started to see this game from a totally different context. So those are the three big things, I think, that people are trying to contend with this title. I understand some of the concerns and some of the criticisms, and definitely everybody's criticism is as valid as whatever I've had to say about this. And I think that it's up to you whether this game is going to be for you or not. But I have some specific ideas of why this game is so incredibly special, and I made a list, my 10 reasons why The Last of Us Part 2 deserves a 10 out of 10. And number one is that it's really fun to play. That's a very important distinction here, because this is a narrative-driven third-person action-adventure game with a heavy leaning on storytelling and a real investment into cut sequences and just the sumptuous production all the way through. But at the core of this game is a game that's incredibly fun on the stick. It's very fun to go into encounters with a stealthy kind of attitude, to level up your weaponry, to circle around and flank enemies and take them out in some very clever ways. It's incredibly fun to bring a bunch of enemies together and throw a Molotov cocktail on them and watch them all burn and die in gruesome ways. And the shock of how gruesome it is probably you never get over it until the game is over, and I needed to decompress. I needed to do my review and talk about it, put it down, play some other things, watch some other things. Then I've been playing the New Game Plus, and now I can just enjoy the intricacies of the mechanics for what they are. And it plays great. It's very fun to use the verticality of the level designs, because that's one of the elements that was really implemented in the design for The Last of Us Part 2. Ellie is a very agile character, which means that we can approach all of these incredibly ornate and detailed environments with lots of different strategies, and it's fun to try them again. It's fun to go back in New Game Plus and to give it a shot. It's also fun to build up your experience and your sort of technical know-how and your tool set, and adjust the way that you deal with the human opponents and also the infected opponents as you progress into the story. And it becomes less a sense of real sheer terror that you're outnumbered, and more a sense of, how do I trap these idiots and take them out, and how do I bring them together and take them out silently, maybe from afar, using the bow and arrow, or a silenced rifle or something like that, or my silenced gun. I found my hunting gun that Abby gets to use in the game incredibly effective, because you actually get a scope, and usually it takes one shot from that weapon to take out somebody. To witness, though, the violence of your actions is another thing, And yeah, there is some really heavy, gruesome stuff that you have to contend with being this effective Rambo-esque butcher that you are in this game. I mean, you take a shotgun and you just paint walls, man. You are a true killer. As a player, we don't see the splatter and the paint that the blood can do across an area often like this. It's almost like Resident Evil in a way, you know, except that a lot of your enemies are human. It's heavy, but at the core of it is a very fun game to play. The exploration loop, the swimming underwater to not get discovered loop, the riding on horseback to avoiding, mines and traps that might be along the way. I love all of the running for your life sequences that happen in the game, which are really expertly crafted and take us back to the early days of Crash Bandicoot, running from giant beasts and traps and things like that. So, number one, super fun to play this game. Number two, it's state-of-the-art on the PlayStation 4. I don't think I've ever felt more justified in my purchase of my expensive LG 4K television set and the Spider-Man PlayStation 4 Pro that I didn't need, but I had to have, and I bought it. But to play it in this high fidelity and to see that Naughty Dog had endeavored to really take advantage of HDR lighting and the just gorgeous, seamless quality of the visuals painted across the screen, all of the tiny little details, just the beautiful kind of sense of being there that this game evokes. And as we're nearing the end of this console's lifetime, it stands now as a great testament to what really the power of the PlayStation 4, particularly the Pro model of the PlayStation 4, is capable of, and kind of the entry level of what we will now expect from the PlayStation 5. And inevitably, we're going to get an up-res version or 60 frames per second, 4K, super hyper-detailed version of this game on the next generation of PlayStation hardware. This game is selling like crazy, so clearly it's an important and likely, I would say almost assuredly, ongoing franchise for PlayStation fans out there, and for Sony and for Naughty Dog. But it is a true, beautiful work of art on PlayStation 4 hardware, and a great reason to have a beautiful home theater setup. So number two, and it's all a little superficial, it's about the graphics and the beauty of it, but yeah, this is just an absolutely gorgeous game. Now, the story is controversial and also sensational. And it's not perfect in the same kind of crystallized, focused, nuanced way that the first Last of Us game was. And I got into this a little bit with my spoiler-free review. You can feel the machine of The Last of Us Part 2 trying to expand the universe, give us new characters to play, new characters to care about, a sense that The Last of Us really refers to the species, not just Joel and Ellie, which is something that I think could be inferred from the title of the first Last of Us game, where it was just about Joel and Ellie, and you feel that intimacy, these two against the vast numbers, and the story of Joel saving Ellie, even though she's the savior of the human race, is incredibly powerful. And also, it sets up why Joel dies in The Last of Us 2, because there's an inevitability that if they were the two to continue, that the hunt would also continue for Joel and for Ellie. And I know that a lot of people have a lot of problems, and I did too, with the fact that Joel is so easily duped by Abby. He and Tommy save her, then Abby turns around and saves them from a horde of infected and says, "We can go back with my friends."
Hey, I'm Tommy. That's Joel. What's your name?
Abby.
We found this deserted cabin, and you guys will be fine there. And they do go back, and then obviously Abby turns on them and shoots Joel in the leg, and Tommy is knocked out, and then the golfing to the head sequence begins, and it's horrifying. The hurdle that I had to overcome is, why did Joel and Tommy, who have been so effective at staying alive and figuring things out, why would they go back with Abby, and why would this scenario happen? Why wouldn't they be a little quicker on the draw? I get that criticism because I shared it. The truth is, with these characters, Tommy is going to likely follow Joel. and take Joel's lead. So if Joel was going to believe in this woman and support her and go back and then sort of intermingle with the friends and then ultimately lose his life, Tommy was going to be there to support Joel. And things happen very quickly in this game, and a lot of deaths happen very quickly in this game, which is another story point that I really like. This is what would happen with Joel.
I'm Mel, by the way.
Tommy, this is my brother.
Joe. Y'all act like you heard of us or something.
Were it not Abby, were it not in this game, this is how he would go. And I think that there is a resignation to Joel. I think that he understands that his time is not permanent and that he's not going to be around forever. He's not he's not rushing into that. I think that he's been a smart survivor for a long time. But as I started to kind of grapple with, why did this have to happen? I realized that this was going to happen with this character. He did something, not just the murder of the people in the hospital and not just the taking of Ellie out of that hospital, sort of closing the door on the idea of a vaccine could mean for the human race, but all of the killing that Joel has had to do, This was going to happen. And it happens quickly and brutally and surprisingly and in an awful way here, but there is no romanticism about his death. And ultimately, I think that's what Naughty Dog was doing with the story of this game, is that it's not romantic when all of these characters die. And in fact, when I started to really think about this, some of my comments and criticisms about the Uncharted series has always been about the vast degree of ineffectual murder that's happening in those games. Now, they're positioned like Indiana Jones tales, and they're positioned as a T-rated experience, but there's so much death and violence in those games that is just kind of frivolous and thrown away. And it didn't really jibe with Naughty Dog as a studio maturing, because they were edging towards photorealism with the Uncharted stuff and giving us a sense of agency in a world that we could believe in. And so when they went to The Last of Us, it felt like a level up in terms of approaching this kind of violence. And trust me, this kind of violence in your storytelling isn't the only way that games can tell stories. It's just, it works with this dystopian nightmare that The Last of Us kind of crafts for us. And what we see with the crescendo of this violence in The Last of Us Part 2, partially because of the unbelievable production value and sort of the next level of the art that we see in this game, is that it is ceaseless, it is numbing, it is terrifying, it is infectious in and of itself, and choices have to be made to end it. And it's a statement, I think, on the throwaway violence of this series for sure, but the throwaway violence that humans have within them and the danger that humans are to each other. And the brusqueness that we see, not only Joel, but other important characters in this game get killed, and the brutality of that in those instant moments is really hard to shake off. And I think that was all done on purpose. And so I came to grips with Joel's murder. I came to kind of understand why it had to happen and how it happened. I'm okay with the fact that it happened, even though I have, the remnants of my disbelief that this character would fall into a trap like that. It was going to happen. He was going to be trapped, and it could have been a sniper shot, it could have been somebody stabbing him in the back, it could have been an infected thing, but Joel was going to die. He's a tragic character that made an impossible choice, but he sealed his fate in The Last of Us Part 1. It was going to happen. Maybe it would have happened in a future episode or, an installment here, but the decision to do it here was going to be an inescapably messy one for fans. I think everybody at Naughty Dog knew that. So what we're left with then is this choice of the game's creators to kill this lovable creation, this character, but also then for us to see behind the eyes of this character that does the killing. And so we go back and forth from the viewpoints of Ellie and of Abby, and we recognize that they're so broken and by the environment around them, from the tragedies that they have endured, from their responsibilities to their peers who are dying around them as this story progresses, and would in any other context, because it's so inhospitable and so deadly to begin with. Everybody's so ready to kill or be killed in this game. And so when we see the confluence of it all, and we see these two superb threats come into contact with each other and go toe-to-toe, but we also know the poignancy and the reasons why they have to fight and why they have to go against each other. And then it all culminates with the idea that they can put their weapons down and they can walk away from each other and they can choose to not kill is incredibly powerful. And at the end of it all, we see these two devastated human beings reflect each other in each other's eyes, and they choose to not finish it. And so I end up, feeling a little hopeful at the end of The Last of Us 2. Hopeful for the humanity that is portrayed within this universe. A complicated, nebulous kind of choice can be made to preserve life instead of snuff it out. And so much of what we have been presented over the course of this story is just the brutal extinguishing of life over and over and over again. It's open-ended and it leaves a lot to be interpreted, and it's much bigger and it's a much broader, scope for this universe that Naughty Dog has created than the first game. And that was the purpose of the game. It was to have us play through it, do these horrific things to other characters within this game, and to see a lot of characters that we start to care about, like Jesse, end up dead quickly. And it's just a shock that this stuff happens, and you just carry on. And then you question the why of it all, and then you walk away thinking, okay, maybe there's hope for these people. Maybe The Last of Us doesn't mean it's going to come down to one person and that's it. That light gets extinguished. It's very effective storytelling. The open-ended qualities of it add to its effectiveness. It's a middle point. There's more coming. But now we've got a much more layered character in Ellie. So, the story is messier, it's bigger, it's more divisive, it's more challenging, but it's incredibly powerful. Number 4, the exploration feels organic, and I know I can feel from anybody that's been playing this game just how blown away they are by the physicality of the environments. You get off of your horse and you sneak into buildings and you can look around and touch all kinds of objects, and you're looting all of these stores and broken down old houses, and you're finding all the stuff that you need to be able to survive. But it just all feels so palpable, so physical, so much like you could reach into the screen and actually touch a lot of this geometry. It's gorgeous. All the plant life, the water effects, and all of the environmental elements of this game. Just absolutely gorgeous. Whether you're inside of dilapidated old supermarkets or coffee shops or bookstores or music stores, or you're on rooftops or in sewers or old army bases, it's all just outstanding work. And it's much broader and more expansive. You can certainly feel the constraints of the game, and it's hard not to remember the wide openness of something like Red Dead Redemption 2 and sort of compare it to that. And it's not like that. You can feel like the edging of these large environments, but you are being ushered forward, but there's multiple ways that you can be ushered forward. There are still choices, and certainly what every environment kind of creates gameplay-wise as well is the idea of approaching encounters from lots of different vantage points, and giving you a lot of replay value with a lot of that as well, especially upping the difficulty or adjusting all of the incredible difficulty settings that you have within the game. Very, very impressed by the organic feel of exploration in the game. Number 5 is the maturity of this experience and how it really helps you to appreciate the art that goes into crafting a story and a game of this caliber. The character choices, relationships that characters have to one another, the brutality that people have when people go toe-to-toe or start shooting at each other. It can just end in devastating ways. But what's incredible is how all of those different choices intersect, and you can go from a well-plotted, well-directed, orchestrated cut sequence into gameplay that just feels so seamless with the story component. You feel very connected to these characters and their existence in this fictional world. And that really speaks to the understanding and the maturity that the developers at Naughty Dog have acquired you know, as they've tried a bunch of different kicks at games like this. So when you talk about this game, there's a lot of ways in to discuss this game, and there's a lot to appreciate about the mature design and the maturity in figuring out how it all has come together, but also in the story itself. Now, number 6 is that the game honors Joel, and I think that we don't feel that at the beginning. We feel like it's an affront to what we remember of Joel because he throws his trust into the wrong group of people and is so quickly and terrifyingly taken care of. How the game kind of echoes his life with flashbacks and little playable bits along the way is beautiful. And we really see his life became all about being Ellie's father, her guardian. In every sense of the word, he fully loved her, and she fully loved him and was grateful to him, even though she hated the fact that he removed the choice of her sacrificing herself for the greater good, and had to overcome that. And I think that's also Ellie's tale, and it's our story to kind of reconcile as we come to the end of The Last of Us Part 2, is that she forgives Joel. She can walk away from that memory and carry on with whatever her destiny is going to be from this point on. In all of those powerful moments, those flashback moments and those moments of connection through music, it's heavy and it's heartfelt. It was difficult to flash through that, particularly because you're still boiling as a fan. And this only happens in that first playthrough, by the way. When you go back, you understand the decisions and you understand the choices. But in that first playthrough, you question all of it and you're angry and you just want Abby killed. You want payback, just like Ellie in the game. But as we start to go back in these flashbacks and we examine the relationship between Joel and Ellie kind of in its final days, you know, in the lead up to the end of the character, we understand that that relationship is frayed and there's a lot of hostility from Ellie towards Joel. And Joel presents himself as a noble, heroic person that kind of used Ellie to save his life, and understands that he probably shouldn't have, but he had to. By doing that, he ended his own life. He sacrifices himself so that Ellie, his new daughter, isn't sacrificed.
Close your eyes. It'll be worth it.
There is a sense of closure at the end of it all. It's beautifully done. It's beautifully handled how they intersperse all of these elements of Joel, and particularly the passing of the guitar to Ellie and the moments of Ellie playing Joel's music, and us being able to kind of connect to those moments, into that character, and let us also say goodbye to him too. The Last of Us Part 2 asks a lot of us when we have to say goodbye right away. In the totality of the game, we get a lot to kind of say goodbye with. And so yeah, it does honor Joel. Now, number 7, and this is obvious, is that you end up caring for the villain of the game. And that doesn't always happen in the stories that we get, particularly these larger-than-life type scenarios, these fantasies. People are so on the knife's edge in these stories, in the Last of Us stories, that they're just at the peak of awful. Even the good people are awful, you know? So the fact that the game allowed us to go on enough of a journey that we actually end up caring about Abby, and we see her redemption, and we see that she understands the futility of her vengeance, and the fact that we see that she befriends these children that are leaving the Seraphites and takes on this very analogous kind of relationship, this mother-son type relationship that Joel had with Ellie, is incredibly powerful. You end up really caring about her and the people that she cares about, and the moral decisions that she ultimately has to face as the game progresses. And that was ballsy for Naughty Dog to go in that direction, but it was incredibly effective for us to end up eventually not only just understanding the motivations of Abby, but genuinely caring for this character and wanting to see her survive. Major applause to Naughty Dog for finding that path, because I'm sure that was not an easy part of the game. I'm sure many, many playthroughs and many, many revisions were made to grant us that opportunity to open our hearts to this character who, let's face it, everybody that's going to be introduced to her for the first time is just going to want to snuff her out as quickly as possible. Number 8 is that there are a lot of great surprises, and I talked about the fact that the shock of these infected creatures is not quite the same in the sequel because we've seen a lot of these archetypes already. We do have a couple of new infected creatures that we encounter, but it's not so much that they surprise you, but it is how they're introduced, you know, ripping off of walls or some of the jump scares, but also the character beats and moments and the fatalities that happen right before your eyes. There are definitely sequences in the game where a character just drops. They've been shot in the head and you've been mid-conversation with them. You can't believe you're living through this, and it's so expertly done, that sort of moment of scrambling to get to safety. That happens several times throughout the game, and just generally the openness and the level of detail that's crafted for you to explore and traverse allows for surprise around corners. And of course you've got the collectibles to pick up and all kinds of, the scraps that you need to outfit yourself with better weapons, but there's just little tiny details, whether there are playable guitars in music stores or, cool posters or safes with little messages and things like that are scattered throughout. There's lots of fantastic surprises in this game. Music to The Last of Us Part 2 is number 9 on my list. It's absolutely beautiful, sort of led by the composer Gustavo Santaolalla, who just does an incredible job at accentuating these emotional moments, these moody beats, this sort of sense of dread and terror as you are about to enter buildings or take a corner inside of fortresses and things like that. Outstanding work. And the fact that they actually modeled the man and stuck him into Jackson, so you actually pass him and he's playing, I think, on a banjo. It's really cool. And there are also lots of cool musical touches and surprises, primarily around the fact that Joel is a guitar player, and I loved Joel's song that Troy Baker sings.
If I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself. Everything I have found here, I'm not found by myself.
When he's having this quiet moment with Ellie, and then Ellie sings an Aha song later on. Ashley Johnson does a great job singing that as well. But there's lots of these little moments where you pick up the guitar and you practice and stuff. It's really cool. It's really smart and very tastefully handled. All of it. The music is very, very key and no pun intended, instrumental in this game having such a powerful emotional impact. And number 10 about The Last of Us Part 2, which I think I've exemplified in my discussion today, is that this game haunts you afterward. And I have to say that as much as I would recommend that you don't try to consume it all super quickly, and if you're watching this already, you didn't do that. You broke that, and you played too much of it too quickly. And I don't know how it sits with you, and I definitely want to hear your thoughts after playing the game. You can leave some comments in the comment section below. But this is also a game that once you do play through it, there's resonances of the experience. There's flashes to key cut sequences and key playable moments within the game that haunt you. What I talk about all the time is that the games that you play in your mind after you've put them down are the best video games. Those are the games that illustrate the true artistry of the medium, and this is absolutely one of those types of games. The resonance of those moments that sticks with you in your mind, and you're still kind of trying to grapple with them, and you're still trying to understand them, and maybe you're on YouTube videos like this, or you're watching other clips, or you're reading about analysis, or you're reading other people's opinions. There's something incredibly infectious about that, and powerful and wonderful about that, with software that really means something and registers and haunts us. The Last of Us Part 2 is absolutely that. It is obviously a game that haunts us because it is the final time we're going to see Joel as a playable character. Presumably, maybe they'll do a prequel game or something like that down the road. It will be very interesting to see where this series takes us from here. Ellie is even more broken, but there is a sense of peace about the character as we close out the end of this title. So I'm very curious to see how Naughty Dog picks up the baton and says, okay, this is where we're going to go. But until then, I know that this game is going to be one that is talked about for years and years.
I'll see you around.
I think that there are probably many of you out there that have played it that are dreaming about it and thinking about it and talking about it with your friends, and maybe didn't like all aspects of it, but it still sticks with you and it's still super powerful and it haunts you. And that's why I think the game is incredibly important. So, you know, I'm sure that there are lots of other points that I could use to illustrate why this game is so important for the medium and so well crafted that it deserves its 10 out of 10. There's a nice little compilation of 10 takeaways that this game left me with. I want to hear yours. I want to hear your opinions on the game. Go ahead and spoil the hell out of this game in the comments below. Everybody's got fair warnings about that this is a spoiler video. I truthfully hope that you did enjoy The Last of Us Part 2. Maybe you didn't love it as much as me. That's okay. But I hope that even if you didn't like it, you gave it the time. Because, you know, it was clearly a lot of work to get this thing made. And I think it was very successful. But yeah, it asks a lot of you as a player. So there you go. 10 reasons why The Last of Us Part 2 deserves a 10 out of 10. I'll be back tomorrow with some new content for you. In the meantime, make sure you check out all the other content that we've been making. Watch the non-spoilery review that I did of The Last of Us Part 2 if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, everybody. We will see you soon. Thank you for being an EPN member if you're supporting the channel that way. And thank you for liking and subscribing and sharing. We'll see you soon. And until then, play forever.